Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies? I'm out of here. I like running better. Welcome back, YouTube viewers, to another video. Alright, so I said back when I did my last part of rewriting the MCU, I would do a part 4. Yes, I considered not doing a part 4 because I ended with what I would have done for my big final Avengers movie. And after that, as we all know, the MCU went really off the rails. And I was, for the most part, trying to follow what it had already done, even if I ended up making up a lot of my own stuff. But I feel like, I will make a part 4, because there's still a lot of stuff to cover. I mean, there's still more Spider-Man, because I only pitched one Spider-Man movie. There's the Fantastic Four, the X-Men. I only pitched one Doctor Strange movie before, so yeah, another Doctor Strange. Now, I will say this. I'm not going to try to I will probably do a part 5 and 6 as well, but these aren't going to try to be. I'm not going to try to build up to some big epic climax, at least, which one can say is a problem of the actual MCU, or after Endgame, it just kind of stopped building to anything, but it's not going to be. But my version, the reason it's not building to any. It's not going to not building to because it's all over the place. It's more like just, I want these stories to be more self-contained, is all. I don't think everything needs to connect in some huge epic way, as you'll soon see. So, without further ado, let's do it to it and dive on in. So, yeah, I only pitched one Spider-Man movie last time, so time for the sequel. And yeah, I'm still keeping it being called Far From Home. Mysterio will still be the villain. It'll still be about Peter Parker's high school going on a field trip to Europe for, I don't know, a week or something, but that's just the general plot outline. My version will have changed quite a lot. So we're not just going to see Mysterio without his helmet all the time because, one, I just think that's stupid, and two, he's not going to try to pose as or he's not going to lie to S.H.I.E.L.D. about being a hero and being from another dimension or whatever, because that's stupid. So the plot here for me would, also Aunt May doesn't know Peter or Spider-Man. Let's just say he brought along his Spider-Man costume himself, because why not? Or his friend did, we can say. Did last time I think I pitched saying that he could be friends with Harry Osborn? We can just keep that he's friends with Ned Leeds. And say that Ned, since he knows the secret, he brought along the Spider-Man costume. Okay, good. So, Peter Parker is his high school is going to Europe for a week during the summer. And then, boom, Ned brought along a Spider-Man costume and said, come on, Peter, you gotta be Spider-Man. Saying, why would I need to be Spider-Man? Said, well, on the news in Europe, there are all these giant monsters attacking everyone. And then when Peter and his high school are, say, touring somewhere in Europe, like the Venice Canal or something, they get attacked by some giant monster only for Mysterio to show up and save the day. And he announces to the world across TV and all that stuff that he's Mysterio, this new superhero or whatever. And everyone thinks, wow, that's cool, Mysterio. Except maybe, Peter Parker might think this guy is a little bit suspicious, He just shows up out of nowhere, and because it can happen again. Another monster shows up, boom, Mysterio shows up to stop it. Peter begins to think, how come every single time a giant monster shows up, Mysterio's there to stop it? And he'll he'll put on his Spider-Man costume, try to find out what's going on, where he ends up crossing paths with Mysterio, who maybe at first tries to be his ally, but is obviously tricking him, and then reveals to him, ha ha ha, I'm really a villain. I did this so people would recognize me and I'd become super famous or whatever, and then I could get my revenge on you, Spider-Man, because my Mysterio backstory here, I'm going off the 1994 Spider-Man cartoon backstory, which is that Mysterio was once this guy named Quentin Beck who worked on a Hollywood special effects set. And then one day he's trying to blow it up or something. I don't remember exactly. And then Spider-Man stops him and he gets him to jail. But now he's gotten released and he wants to get revenge on Spider-Man for ruining his criminal career back then. And I guess also his Hollywood career, which is basically the same thing. Okay, anyway, so yeah. This wouldn't be the most complex film ever, and basically just end with Spider-Man defeating Mysterio, except maybe you could leave some kind of hint that Mysterio wasn't actually captured, because maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. I don't know. I mean, I always appreciate the detail in the Spectacular Spider-Man that every single time it seems like Mysterio has been captured, it was actually a robot or a hologram or a dummy or just whatever. But I wouldn't have Spider-Man's secret identity get revealed at the end because Spoiler for when I get to No Way Home. I don't want to do the whole Spider-Man has to go to Doctor Strange and have the world have his secret identity wiped from everyone's minds because I just don't like that. Like it was a cool idea to have a movie about Spider-Man's identity being leaked, but I just don't really want to do that. So yeah, this would be pretty simple. You know, Peter goes to Europe, fights Mysterio as Spider-Man. But you're wondering, well, okay, what would the point of this be though, other than just a fun adventure? It doesn't need to be anything super complex. Not every movie needs to be some kind of crazy grand thing, but I guess you could add in some Peter Parker drama about here's when we'll finally introduce Mary Jane, because I'd say she wasn't in the last one, so that's what we'll do here. And it'll be the real Mary Jane, not any of this MJ, Michelle Jones, Zendaya, whatever. That's not Mary Jane. So say Peter is in love with her, because of course he is, and then he ends up maybe saving her as Spider-Man, and then maybe he can hear her saying something like, you know, Tiger, I sure like that Spider-Man. And then he's thinking, oh man, she only likes Spider-Man but not Peter Parker. It's not completely comic accurate or whatever, but that's just the exact kind of Parker luck you'd hear. I mean, that is actually a thing in comics. Where at first Peter's in love with Liz Allen, then she'll say, yeah, well, I got saved by Spider-Man. I'm waiting for him, Peter. I just found that kind of stuff to be funny. Okay, so we're done with Spider-Man for now. What's next? Doctor Strange 2. So, if you didn't see my last... Well, actually, I believe I covered in part 2, not even part 3. It's been a while since I covered Doctor Strange. Okay, so, as a recap, the last time I talked about Doctor Strange, my pitch for his first movie would be he defeats Baron Mordo and becomes accepted as a big sorcerer guy. But he didn't kill Baron Mordo. He didn't die. Baron Mordo has only been defeated. Maybe he's been imprisoned or he's run away. But this time, based on some old comic, Doctor Strange and the Ancient One find out that Dormammu is trying to get into our dimension to invade the Earth. And so Doctor Strange has to travel into the dark dimension and face against Dormammu. Sounds pretty simple, but I think there's a lot you could do with this if you follow the original 60s comic story where Dormammu first appeared. When Doctor Strange enters Dormammu's dimension, it's this crazy, weird place with all sorts of strange objects and creatures and planetoids floating everywhere. Right? If you ever watched Ben 10, you know the Null Void, or I guess the Zone of Silence for those Archie Sonic fans in my audience. You know, that sort of thing, like that kind of weird pocket dimension you see in a lot of fiction. That's kind of what the Dark Dimension looks like, but even more wild. And much like in the comic story, Doctor Strange would meet Clea, this white-haired girl who wears pink and green gloves, and I probably should have pulled up her image. So the original comic story is that, yeah, the Ancient One tells Doctor Strange, hey, I want to fight Dormammu because he's going to take over our world, but I'm too old and too weak. You need to go into his dimension and face him yourself. And so Doctor Strange does. But before he gets to Dormammu, he runs into Clea, who's telling him that, hey, you need to be careful about destroying Dormammu because if you kill him, that he's all it's protecting our own dimension from the mindless ones, this giant horde of zombie creatures. So Doctor Strange thinks, hey, Dormammu's evil. I need to stop him from getting to the Earth, but he's also trying to defend his own world from these guys called the mindless ones. Of course, we'd also Doctor Strange maybe set up that romance plot with Clea. Which, by the way, Clea is in the MCU, but she's just, you know, one of those many abandoned post-credit scenes that never goes anywhere. At the end of Multiverse of Madness, she just appears and says, hey, Doctor Strange, come with me. We're going to go do something. And then he randomly has a third eye for some reason, and he says, okay, let's go do whatever. And then they just disappear, and it's been 3 years, and that plotline has never been followed up on. I sincerely doubt it's ever going to get followed up on. So yeah, Doctor Strange would end up defeating Dormammu, but he'd tell him, hey, I'm not going to kill you because I know that if I do, then your dimension will be destroyed by the mindless ones. But he also says, never come back to Earth. And Dormammu says something like, I don't know, well, you may have defeated me for now, but this isn't the last you've seen of me, or some generic bad guy dialogue like that. But also, I think a good thing to think about for this movie, if it were real, is that you really need to make Dormammu feel like a massive threat. In the MCU, they did, but they just made him a giant floating head. Dormammu is supposed to be the same size as a human being. He's a guy who looks just like this image. A guy with a giant fire head. He kind of looks like he has the Human Torch's head on a regular body, basically. And maybe you could have some kind of climax where he turns gigantic, because he does do that in the comics sometimes. You could mess around with all his magical abilities, make some really crazy climax or something like that. I don't know, there's a lot you could do here, even if the plot isn't that complex. Now we're getting back into Spider-Man, so first of all, I guess to acknowledge this, I'm going to say that when I'm making these, I'm thinking, okay, what year these get released? So I'm going to say that my version of Far From Home got released the same year as the real one, 2019. So my version No Way Home got released in 2021, just like the real version. And I guess so would my Doctor Strange too. Also, because I am thinking of what year would these be released if this were how the MCU really went, we're not having more than 2 movies a year. Just I know part of the reason superhero fatigue happened as quickly as it did. Okay, not just because the movies became bad, but also because there were just way too many of them. But I think 2 a year is not too much, so yeah. So, this version of Spider-Man No Way Home would actually follow up on the post-credit scene of Homecoming. The Vulture and the Scorpion have broken out of prison, and I guess the Scorpion would actually become a thing now, because in the MCU, we see a guy who was the guy who was going to become the Scorpion, but he never does, because, you know. So, okay, how would this go? Peter Parker gets back from Europe, and now he's still really in love with Mary Jane and all that. That's the whole Peter Parker stuff. He still has to worry about Aunt May and how's he and paying the bills by taking pictures for the Daily Bugle. Cause look, I know this is 2021 when this would take place. I know no one reads newspapers, but to me that's just Peter Parker's job. He takes pictures for the Daily Bugle. That's what was in the 90s cartoon, the Sam Raimi movies, the Spectacular Spider-Man. There are some things that you just don't change. I mean, you could say the same thing about why are Clark Kent and Lois Lane still news reporters? No one reads the newspapers anymore. I mean, you could say they work for TV news, but even then, it's just there are things about these characters you don't change, even if they don't make the most sense. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, so yeah, that's the regular Peter Parker stuff, except now the Vulture has not only returned to seek revenge on Spider-Man, but he has a new partner, the Scorpion. And Spider-Man has to pull out all the stops to defeat them. I mean, I suppose I should also mention how the Scorpion would even get his powers, which is we can just do the whole original comic origin where J. Jonah Jameson thinks, hey, maybe I can get a guy to volunteer for this weird lab experiment. He'll get this big scorpion suit, and he can finally defeat Spider-Man. Because you might be wondering, wait, how would that work? Because he'd have broken that he'd be a ex-con. Maybe you could say that when he and the Vulture, out of costume of course, break out of prison, they split up and say, and the Vulture will say, hey, don't you want to come work with me? You can become part of my gang or something. And the guy who becomes a Scorpion says, no, I'm going to try to find my own way to get superpowers. And then he stumbles upon J. Jonah Jameson, and he says, hey, I want you for this some kind of project to become a new rival to Spider-Man, to defeat that menace to society. And he'll say, okay, sure, I'll do it. And then he'll get superpowers, and then he'll meet up with the Vulture, and they'll both try to kill Spider-Man. Spider-Man will have to deal with that. Meanwhile, he'll have to deal with the whole Peter Parker stuff. Now, you might be wondering, gee, this sounds kind of small scale for a movie called No Way Home. I mean, this is the conclusion to a trilogy. Shouldn't you want it to have some stakes? And to that I'd say, well, the previous movies only had one villain. I'd say two, plus one of them being a returning villain does make things feel more epic. And maybe you could have Peter Parker finally, get Mary Jane at the end. I don't know. And yeah, you could do that, and just like the real MCU, where the subplot in No Way Home is he wants to get into college, you could have Peter Parker finally get into college at the end. And Aunt May would be really sad throughout the movie about how, oh no, her nephew is going to leave. How is he going to take care of himself? He's such a frail, nice young boy. He can't live on his own. If you don't read Spider-Man comics, that probably seems out of character to you, but if you have, then that's just the most Aunt May thing ever. So yeah, Spider-Man would finally defeat the two villains once and for all. As Peter Parker, he'd get the girl, maybe, sort of, I guess you could say, and he'd be off to college. Bada bing, bada boom. That's the conclusion of my Spider-Man trilogy. When I do a part 5, I will do another Spider-Man movie, but for now, this is just a nice little bookend. Okay. Now we're finally on to the Fantastic Four. Now, here's what I mean when I say that not all these movies will be connected. So, the real Fantastic Four First Steps movie is, takes place in another universe because of the whole multiverse saga thing, and I will also keep that. But it's not because I'm trying to set up some kind of multiverse story, because I hate multiverse stories. It's more so a case of this movie would be released under the Marvel Studios brand. It would be made by them, but it wouldn't be connected to the MCU because, well, I'm not a fan of the actual movie we got a few weeks ago. I do like the whole 60s futuristic aesthetic. I think that's a really cool style, and yeah, cause I want to keep that. So that's the first thing I'm doing, and I'm keeping the title for simplicity's sake, and I think it's a good title, but few things. One, the Fantastic Four will have their comic book costumes like in this image from Earth's Mightiest Heroes. They're just going to have the classic blue uniforms with the black gloves and things around their necks. The Thing is not going to have a costume, he's just going to wear shorts. You might be wondering, shouldn't all the Fantastic Four have a costume? And to that I'd say, by the logic of the Thing should have a costume, so should the Hulk. But you would never want to see the Hulk wearing a costume. He's just supposed to wear the shorts. That's just the design. That's how it was for decades, and that's how it still is in the comics, and multiple adaptations. Now, about the Fantastic Four's characterization, that brings me to the topic of casting. I don't know who to cast because I don't know modern actors, but I will say this. Please don't get Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards. He's a good actor, but everyone is right when they say he's in everything these days. The Mandalorian, The Last of Us, Gladiator 2, The Wild Robot, which is his best role. And now this. Apparently he's even in more stuff no one watches. And he's not going to have a mustache. Because one, okay, ideally I'd cast an actor who doesn't. And also, not only does Reed Richards never wear one, but if this is supposed to be the 60s, why would he look like that? Most men didn't look like that at all in the 60s. He only had facial hair when he was working in his lab for too long. This might sound like a nitpick, but it really isn't. I mean, would you want to see Batman or Superman with a mustache? You probably wouldn't. Sue should be younger than she is in the actual movie we got, because she's supposed to be in, what, her late 20s? I mean, Johnny's in, what, his early 20s? And Sue is his sister, so it doesn't really make sense for her to look like she's 40 years old. Also, the Thing would actually have the voice he's supposed to. I don't know what is wrong with the movies, but he just doesn't sound anything like the Thing. He's supposed to have that chip on his shoulder New York accent type of voice. That's what he had in the 90s cartoons, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the 2000s movies, some of the video games. That's just how the Thing talks. Okay, now that I've established all of those, just set how these Fantastic Four movies would go in general, rules that apply to all of them, what would the actual story be about? Well, I do think doing what the movie did, where we don't have to waste time on their origin, and it's as simple as, oh, we see the Fantastic Four talk about their origin on a TV show, which is something that actually happened in the 90s cartoon. I appreciate. I know that probably wasn't. They probably weren't taking that from the 90s cartoon. It's probably just a coincidence, but a cool coincidence nonetheless. So that would be a simple way to get exposition, So maybe the Fantastic Four on the Tonight Show or something, which was around in the 60s. And they'd say, he asked them, okay, Fantastic Four, can you tell your origin to all our audiences at home? Which might be a little forced, but I'm sure you could get it done some way. However, the Fantastic Four, unlike in the actual movie, they would be new to this, because the title of the new movie doesn't make any sense. It's called First Steps, but it's established the Fantastic Four have been around for years. They've already fought the Mole Man and the Red Ghost. And Reed and Sue are going to have a baby, but that's just... you don't do that in the first movie. You're skipping over so much stuff. It's like one guy said, which is, it feels like I'm being tossed into the fourth season of a TV show without seeing the first three. So the villain, as you could tell by this slide, would be the Mole Man. I mean, he's the very first Fantastic Four villain, so why not have him be the first one here? I will do Doctor Doom at some point, but I don't want to do him at the very beginning. But I also don't want to do Galactus at the beginning either, because it's too early for Galactus. So yeah, the Fantastic Four are superheroes now. Maybe they've stopped some small-time villains. maybe you could say the first issue where they had their costumes, which was issue 3, I believe, they fought this guy called the Miracle Man. Maybe you could say, oh yeah, they fought the Miracle Man, and they fought a few small-time crooks, but they're basically just celebrities. They're not really full superheroes yet. But all that changes when the Mole Man arises, and he wants to take over the world with his giant army of mole men and monsters. And here's where I think we could get some juicy drama out of this, which is that I think the most interesting part of the Fantastic Four story is the story of the Thing, which the new movie completely abandons, which is the fact that he feels like a monster. I mean, the other FF have superpowers, but they still look like humans, but no, he's been turned this giant orange rock man, and he feels like a freak. This was one of the reasons the original Fantastic Four comics got so popular. A story like that just hadn't been done before in a comic, let alone a superhero one. And also, the new movie completely abandons the Thing's blind girlfriend, Alicia, which is stupid. The 2000s movies had her. So yeah, the thing is, a pun unintended, that the Thing has a girlfriend except she's blind because, and so to her, the way he looks doesn't matter. She doesn't even know how he looks, but she loves him for who he is, not, she doesn't care about what he looks like. So you could kind of contrast the Thing and the Mole Man, because the Mole Man's origin is that he used to just live as an ordinary human. He was born looking like a freak. So basically, like, I don't know, Quasimodo or something from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So his original comic origin has this montage of people saying, "I know you're qualified to work here, but you can't. You scare the other employees away." Or some woman says, "Me go out with you? Ha! Don't make me laugh." And some random guy says, "Hey, is that your face or you're wearing a mask?" To the point, and the Mole Man eventually fled society, exiling himself until he found his way to the center of the earth by accident and got turned to the Mole Man. So the contrast would be him telling the Thing. The contrast would be between him and the Thing. Even though Ben sees himself as a monster because he looks like a giant rock man, he's still a hero. He still fights alongside the Fantastic Four. The Mole Man never just did anything with the fact that he just took, oh, people hate me, so now I hate all people. So while one chose to become a superhero despite his deformities, another one just became a horrible villain. I do think having Ben be the focus would be a good call. I mean, he's the most likable member of the Fantastic Four, he's the most popular character, but that doesn't mean the other three wouldn't do anything. It's just, they're not as complex characters as the Thing. Reed is a well-respected scientist across the world who definitely does have the times where he gets really stressed out, but he usually keeps things a calm head. He's very smart. He's supposed to be the smartest man in the world, I think. And he's the guy who holds the FF together. He's their leader. And sometimes his scientific babble gets over Ben's head and he gets really annoyed, but he and Ben are supposed to be lifelong friends, so we can keep that. Johnny will be the young hotshot, who gets on Ben's nerves all the time. They get into fights, but they're ultimately still friends. And Sue would be maybe the most look, I've got to admit, Sue is the most boring member of the FF. I really don't have much to say about her. Her character would basically just be she's probably the most serious one. Well, Reed is the one who is the leader, who takes charge and stuff like that. She's the one who tells them, okay, come on, settle down, guys, or something like that. I just don't really know what to do with her character. That's all. She's just really boring. So yeah, this has been the longest section of the video, but my version of Fantastic Four First Steps would be the FF face their first super villain, the Mole Man, and the Thing deals with the fact that, well, he may be a monster, look like a monster, at the end of the day, he is a hero, and that's what really counts. Yeah, what would the post-credit scene be? Because I don't really mention those. The post-credit scene would be showing Doctor Doom. For whatever the next Fantastic Four movie is. Okay, finally time to tackle the Uncanny X-Men. So, this picture is my team lineup. I mean, Magneto's not a member of the X-Men, but he's in the movie. Okay, so, for many people's pitch for an X-Men reboot, they want the team lineup to be the original team lineup of Cyclops, the Beast, Marvel Girl, Iceman, the Angel, and I don't mind that team lineup, but, I mean, there are so many X-Men characters, I feel like I'd rather just make up my own team lineup. So my team lineup is Cyclops, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Rogue, Kitty Pryde, who we can just call Marvel Girl because she was when she first appeared in the comics, and Iceman. So that's 6 characters, plus Professor X. Why did I not include the Beast? I wanted to, but 6 characters is already a lot, so I figured it'd be better to just keep the character roster low. Why didn't I include Jean? She's in everything. There are a few reasons. One, and the least important reason, is that what is her superhero name? Originally, she was called Marvel Girl, but I don't think that really fits a lot of her modern costume designs, and I'm having Kitty Pryde be called Marvel Girl. But in every continuity, she's either called Marvel Girl or just Jean Grey. What the heck is up with that? How come all the other X-Men have superhero names except for her? That has always bothered me. Why does no one ever mention that? You're telling me if the X-Men are in a battle in public and people are running away but can listen to them, they're saying, Cyclops is saying, hey, Wolverine, save those people. Hey, Nightcrawler, get over there. Jean Grey, go do that. You think people would overhear and say, hey, I know this real name of one of the X-Men. I mean, they're supposed to have secret identities, so why would one of them just not have a secret identity or not have a superhero name? Am I the only one who thinks that isn't incredibly stupid? Also, I just find Jean to be really boring. It's the same thing with Sue. There's just never been a story she was in that I really cared about her. But the reason I kept Sue for the Fantastic Four is because it's the Fantastic Four. She has to be there. At least there's some stuff you could do there, but with Jean, aside from the Phoenix Saga, which I don't really want to tackle at all, what do you do with her? I mean, I couldn't give her the superhero name Phoenix, because then fans would say, no, that's not comic accurate, and you know what? I agree. So this is my X-Men team lineup. Who's the villain? Magneto. You might be thinking, oh, come on, Magneto again. Which, yeah, I can understand that, but I'd also include the Sentinels. In fact, I'm kind of taking a page from this video called How to Make a Good X-Men Movie, where the villains were Magneto and the Sentinels. Because the thing is, this is the X-Men. You kind of have to have Magneto around from day one. You can't just introduce him later. He's really important. And so this is my team lineup. Why did I choose each member? Cyclops? Simple. He's Cyclops. He's the leader of the team. Well, I'm definitely not a huge fan of him. He has had adaptations I've enjoyed, so you gotta keep him there. Wolverine, I mean, he's Wolverine. Of course he's here. He's the most popular character, but he would not be the main character because much as I love Wolverine, much as everyone else does, he's had, what, 3 or 4 of his own movies? He doesn't need to be in everything. I love the TV show Wolverine and the X-Men. It's my favorite X-Men thing ever, but the show is called, it's basically Wolverine and Friends. I mean, the other members do get some good development, but so many of the episodes are focused on him. That's just true. Why did I include Nightcrawler? Well, one of my first successful videos was about Nightcrawler. He's my favorite member of the team, because I think there's a lot you can do with him. Much like the Thing, he is a member of the team who doesn't look like a human. He looks like some kind of monster, except, unlike the Thing, he doesn't mind it. He accepts that this is the way God made him, and it must have been for a reason, because he's supposed to be a religious guy, and I think it's an interesting angle to have that kind of a character here. Why did I include Rogue? Okay, I mean, there are 2 reasons. Okay. Okay, one, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can agree that they like having superhero teams where there's one who looks good, and that's not the entire reason, though. That's the smaller part, but the most important reason is just that I always found her to be more interesting of a character than most of the other X-Men. Like, the whole story in the 90s cartoon, for the one episode where she's thinking that if she just touches someone, if she just shakes someone's hand or something without wearing a glove, that person will will be unconscious or even go into a coma. So she's thinking that, hey, if there was such a thing as a cure for mutants, should I take the cure? I think that's an interesting source of drama. The kind of character who acts super confident on the outside, but on the inside is pretty vulnerable. And then Iceman and Marvel Girl, well, I mean, you gotta have the 2 young ones, I guess, and I just like their characters. The only reason they're even here is because of Wolverine and the X-Men. I mentioned that show earlier. In that show, there were the 2 young ones who just hang around in the background and have just some really great... They're mostly there for comic relief, but they still have some good moments. And I just like their characters. and I figure I'm keeping them around. So after all that set up, what would the actual story be? So the X-Men have existed for a little bit, you could say. And I guess, every adaptation of the X-Men begins with someone new getting introduced to them. So maybe you could say that Kitty, or Marvel Girl, I'll call her, is the new member of the X-Men, which, yes, I am well aware that it is cliche that every single X-Men adaptation begins with some teenage girl getting introduced to the team, but it works, doesn't it? You could do Iceman instead, but, I really don't care which one. Just use one of them as the introductory character. And so, one of them gets introduced to the X-Men, meets the team, and on the run from, I don't know, just maybe they're mute. Let's say Iceman's the one. Let's say Kitty's the one. Okay, so let's say her mutant powers just so happen to be manifesting around this time, and then people find out she's a mutant. They chase her or something, say, no more mutants or whatever, and then she ends up running into one of the X-Men, and let's say Iceman, because he's the other young guy, and whatever. We could maybe do a romance, because that's what was implied in Wolverine and the X-Men. Maybe you could save that for a sequel, make it a recurring background subplot. I don't know. So you could say he introduces her to the X-Men. She meets Professor X, all the other members of the team. And around this time, Magneto finally shows up and attacks some politician or something, and says he's going to take over the world and lead mutants into a new age where they'll finally be treated with the respect they deserve. And Professor X could learn about this, and you have to explain to the X-Men who Magneto is. And look, I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to explain where I'd take a movie like this, because there's so much you could do, and there are a lot of characters, so it's kind of hard to describe what each of them would be role in the story. What the role in the story each of them would have is basically be the X-Men try to fight Magneto, except then in response, these government guys say, hey, um, mutants are popping out everywhere. There's even this Magneto guy now who's a huge threat. We should build some kind of way to defeat them. So for the third act, the Sentinels are created, and they'd actually look like the Sentinels, unlike in all the movies. And we'd get this awesome battle where the X-Men fight the Sentinels at the end, and maybe they'd have to work together with Magneto to defeat them. And at the end, Professor X or Cyclops or someone would say, hey, now that you've worked together with us, why don't you stop being a supervillain? And he'd say, no, because that's mutants are only gonna be respected if we do things my way. Obviously, this wouldn't be the actual dialogue, but something to that effect. And so we're then with Professor X and maybe Cyclops, I guess, because he's a leader, talking about how, it'll be a fought battle for mutants to finally be accepted, but we gotta take things one step at a time, right? Okay, that's my X-Men movie. Time for one of my favorite parts of this video, Daredevil. We can call it Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, because, we already had a movie just called Daredevil in the 2000s, so you might be wondering, why is the Submariner here? Why do I have this comic cover here? So, this, as the cover says, this epic doesn't need any hard sell. It's one of Marvel's greatest. Daredevil battles Submariner. This is one of my favorite 60s Marvel issues, one of my favorite Marvel comics ever. So, you might be wondering, wait. You're going to base an entire movie off of one issue? Sort of. So, the main conflict with the villain will come from this issue, but we're still going to have to throw in his origin. We don't need to spend a super long time on it, of course, but the origin we can make it the origin the 90s Spider-Man cartoon established. But we can mix that in with his comic origin, which is that, okay, when Matt Murdock was a boy, his father was a boxer, except as he got older, less and less people were willing to sponsor his fights. But Matt Murdock's father was saying, come on, I've got a son, I really need to support him. I need to fight. So the only guy to say, hey, I'll sponsor you as a boxer would be the Kingpin. And he'd say, well, remember, I'm fixing this fight, so you can't win. But when he sees his son Matt in the ring, he's saying, no, I am going to win for him. And he does. So then the Kingpin has his men shoot the Daredevil's father. That's exactly what happens in the comics, except instead of it being the Kingpin, it's just some random mobster. Oh, and also, I guess this happens earlier before his father dies, but, Matt Murdock as a kid sees some blind guy walking across the street and thinking, oh no, that man can't see the truck coming toward him. And then he leaps in to save the guy, and then some nuclear waste falls on him, and it makes Matt Murdock blind. But over the years, he developed his heightened senses, and so when he's an adult, he becomes not only a lawyer, but also a superhero, Daredevil. Okay, origin out of the way, good. So he's working as Matt Murdock, as a lawyer alongside Foggy Nelson and their secretary Karen Page. Okay, good. But then also, at night, I guess, he dons his Daredevil costume and fights crime, kind of like Batman. But then one day, the Submariner emerges from the deep sea, and he is here to sue the human race, because that's actually what happens in the comic. So in the comics, the Submariner first appears in Fantastic Four, where he fights the Fantastic Four, he fights the Avengers, he fights the Hulk, and he just wants to take over the surface world and reclaim his birthright. But here he's thinking, the humans populated the world all over the place. Maybe instead of fighting them, that'll be my last resort. First, I'm going to try to do things in a legal way. So he decides to sue mankind, and he just so happens to walk into Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson's office. And he says, you are going to help me sue mankind. And they tell him like they do in the comics, which is that's impossible. There is no one nation that represents the human race itself. That's just we can't do that. And he says that I do not care about your stupid laws, but I guess it's true. But let's say he just does anyway, he somehow convinces them, hey, you're going to take me to court or else. And of course, the judges and jury say, you can't sue mankind. We're not giving you the entire surface world because your kind used to live here thousands of years ago. So then the Submariner would decide, okay, I'm going to take things into my own hands. And he gets the armies of Atlantis or something, or maybe not the armies of Atlantis because that's a bit big because this is just Daredevil, not the Avengers. So the Submariner decides to start causing havoc across New York City. And so this leads Daredevil to step in and try to stop him. And the final battle would have Daredevil get defeated, because as strong as he is, he can't defeat the Submariner. But much like in the original comic story, he would say, Daredevil, I thought you would be weak. You're just an ordinary human, yet you showed so much determination. You never gave up trying to defeat me. And as such, I will spare you. And for now, anyway, I will let you go. I'm going to go back to Atlantis and be done with this. Now, I think the Submariner's appearance in the MCU was vaguely inspired by this issue, but they took a classic story and butchered it. Instead of being called Namor, he's called Namor. He has a mustache for some reason. He looks completely different, and his plan is, the U.S. had slaves, so and so did all these other countries. So I'm gonna destroy all these other countries because they had slaves a long time ago, which is one of the dumbest movie plots I have ever heard in my life. What the heck was Wakanda Forever? And yeah, the MCU called him Namor, not Namor, which is just unbelievably dumb. So yeah, that's my plot for a Daredevil movie. It's based on an iconic comic book story, which is also, by the way, the first issue where Daredevil wears his red costume. And that's my Daredevil movie. We could still set up a sequel where the Kingpin actually appears, with maybe a post-credit scene, or, I establish the Kingpin in his origin story, that sort of thing. So that's my Daredevil movie for now. And that is the end of the video. I definitely had to do a lot more setup for this one, because I had to explain Daredevil and the FF and the X-Men, but overall I still enjoyed this one, and I think if this is the kind of thing we got out of the MCU post-Endgame in real life, we'd be a lot happier. One, we aren't having a million post-credit scenes that have no plans. Two, I think the most important part is that they are starring characters people care about. 'Cause that's the problem with the MCU nowadays. Okay, they've got Thor, they've still got Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, and sort of the Hulk, but not really. But who else do they have? Not Captain America. the Thunderbolts, um, Shang-Chi, and okay, I thought his movie was okay, but still. What, the Eternals? They've just run out of characters that people like, and now we're stuck with the D-listers nobody cares about. But I think if you had initially started with, okay, here's another Spider-Man, now here's the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, and Doctor Strange again, and Daredevil, people would get way more excited for these movies, and since there wouldn't be as many of them, and the studios could spend more time making these movies as good as they could be, superhero fatigue might not have even happened yet. I mean, let's see. The superhero movie craze started back in 2008, 17 years ago, and superhero movies already started dying a couple years back. Another popular genre was westerns. Those were popular from the 30s all the way to the end of the 60s, but it took 30 years before those finally started to die. I think the fact that it took, what, 14 years for superhero movies to die really says something. If they had just been good, maybe they could have lasted longer. So, this video is probably going to be a lot more controversial than the last videos in this series, but I still hope you comment down and say what you think about this. So, that's all for now, and remember to stay way past cool.